everybody. Today we're back. We're going to be talking about Mercury in the 8th house. So, we got to do our cookbook interpretation. I'm going to be looking down at my notes a little bit. The 8th house is about the death and rebirth cycle, that whole transformation. It's about renewal. It's about deep inner feelings. It's about intimacy. It's about the things that we share with others, whether they be financial, emotional, physical. It's also about inheritance. And then we have Mercury, which is about communication of all kinds, be it verbal, written, email, a note. It's also about your actual voice, like the tone and the volume and the affect, stuff like that. Most importantly, it's about what are we talking about and why do we feel compelled to talk about it. The things that we consciously choose to think about, the sort of books or topics that we're interested in reading or interested in researching, and it is the manner in which we go about conversing with others. So we have three super interesting examples. We have Michael Jordan, famous basketball player, probably the most famous and the most successful. We have Jeffrey Dahmer. I'm going to talk a lot about him later in the video. And then we have Prince Harry, who I thought was a really interesting example. Each of them represents Mercury in the 8th in a very different way, but all very accurate incarnations of this placement. What are we talking about here? We're talking about 8th house things, of course. Your speech and the topics that you like to talk about will be intense, deep, and may skew towards the darker side. You enjoy talking about things that have substance, and for a couple of reasons. One of these reasons is it allows you to see who you're talking to, how willing they are to engage with you on these deep topics. Do they go deeper with you? Do they stop and shy away? Do they seem confused as if they've never thought about these things before? It allows you, when you talk, to get a read on the person that you're talking to. It also allows you to gain perspective from others, and it can be quite therapeutic for you if you're talking about something deep and intense, especially if it's something that's been bothering you or maybe something traumatic that happens to you. Somebody else's perspective on that can really give you a new way to look at things. It can expand on something that you were already kind of thinking but weren't sure about. They may be bringing up topics to you that are deep and intense that you've never even thought about before, which is unlikely because your mind is sort of a bit in this Hades-like underworld, but it is good for your mind to bounce around in this place, and it's good for you to intake what others have to say about this darker and deeper place as well. And you just find this aspect of conversation and this aspect of life more interesting to talk about. If somebody's talking to you about the weather or a new Cardi B song or whatever, like, you could, but you do not prefer it. And I'm a Mercury in Scorpio, so I understand this. It just doesn't do a whole lot for you. As much as if you were to ask someone how they feel about monogamy, what they think about religion, or where they are on politics, you've gained so much insight into them with these deeper topics to their morals, their values, their experiences, their ideologies, their philosophies and stuff like that, versus a more mundane topic where it's like your opinion on this new movie that came out doesn't really let me know about you in a deeper way or in any kind of way. It's just kind of like, okay, that's how you felt about that. It doesn't let me see into who you are as much as these deeper conversations do. These conversations show the thought process of accumulation of someone's life experience. How someone feels about sex or death or rebirth and regeneration lets you know other things about them without it even having to be said, which is a huge part of the 8th house. There's a lot that is said and unsaid. It's also verbal but non-verbal as well. You will talk a lot about your inner feelings. You're very sensitive, and so you take the words and the actions of other people to heart a lot of times, and you'll sit with these things and how they made you feel for a while, but you keep things close to the chest. The 8th house is about really keeping things to ourselves, and only letting a very select few people see how we feel. And that includes, verbalizing your feelings. But there is a tendency, especially with 8th house and Scorpio energy, for you to build up a resentment. So if there is something that you have been thinking about or chewing on for a while, and it is something that's bothering you, it is a release, sort of like a balloon in a sense, where you let a little bit out of verbalizing that and being vulnerable with people that you feel that you can be vulnerable with people that you feel like will not turn around and use this against you. To let that out a bit, and again, get that intake, that influx of new information, a new perspective, and a new voice on something that's deeper and darker, and something that may have been bothering you, or even if it's not bothering you, something that's just deep that you've really been wondering about. When we look at what we're talking about, I thought in this placement it was interesting to look at what we're not talking about here. And one of the things that you may not talk about a lot is yourself. You are deeply fascinated by others and what they're thinking and what they're feeling, what their thought processes are. What are their motivations? What makes them tick? What makes them go? What makes people do what they do? That's more what you want to find out. Letting someone in and explaining how you feel about certain things, what makes you tick, what makes you go, and what your motivations are, is a lot. That's not ever really going to be your first inclination. You're going to try to take in as much as you can, and usually, especially with me being a Mercury and Scorpio, I can talk to somebody. So it's similar. I should say, can talk to people for a long time before they turn the conversation around on us and say, well, wait, what about you? Or, oh wait, I've been talking about myself for 20 minutes. How do you feel? And it's really up to the evolution of the person. But I think even still in that initial turnaround of conversation, you will still try to, you will still try to evade the question. You will still try to be vague and push it back on them, because sharing about yourself and your inner feelings and what you really think is, again, something that we really like to keep close to the chest until we are very ready. If someone comes into your 8th house, or if it's just, somebody you feel like is a kindred spirit and you feel like you can be vulnerable, you can eventually start to let your guard down. But to the average person, you are going to be quite vague and evasive about these sort of deeper topics that, I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Anything 8th house, you're more going to kind of shy away, use vague language, and sort of veer the conversation back into either them or just something else completely. One huge topic of Mercury in the 8th house is talking about your sexuality, verbalizing your ideologies and your experiences and your thoughts and your fears and all that kind of stuff, verbalizing that about the realm of sexuality to another person. And this can really go both ways. You can either be very, very open to talking about it because, again, you like to talk about the deeper things. You like to talk about these 8th house things. You like to talk about sexual matters. Or on the flip side, you can be very secretive and very guarded. And you'll be very interested to know what those things are like for other people, what their experiences are in the bedroom, what they've been through, what their philosophies and their values and stuff are. But again, when it comes to you, you might really, especially around that topic, you might really not be forthcoming, not know how to or if you should share those kind of things with people. Maybe only the people who you are intimate with will know those things, and maybe not even them. Maybe you might hide things from them as well, as far as how you feel about those topics. If you fall on the spectrum of being somebody who's more open in talking about your sexuality, who spends a lot of time thinking about different aspects of this. My friend told me about a podcast called Call Her Daddy, where they talk about a lot of different things, relationships, friendships, and life, but a lot of it is a woman who runs it. I think her name's Alex, I forget, but it doesn't really matter. But she talks about different aspects of sexuality. What do you like and not like in the bedroom? How many people or how many times? Or what does are you open? Like, do you have multiple partners? Do you have one partner at a time? All these different aspects of you can be very fascinating. You may really be open to taking in perspective. So like listening to those kind of podcasts, reading books about sexuality, and some of the big ones, like there are heavy hitters in the realm of books on sexuality. Books like Come As You Are, The Art of Seduction, and other ones that I will put up on the screen that a lot of people have read it, and just they are highly regarded in this realm. You like those kind of things. Tossing around those ideas really gives you a lot to chew on and a lot to think about. And really, when you think about it, in the realm of sexuality, there is no right or wrong answer. There is no, I mean, as long as you're not like hurting anybody or hurting yourself, there is no one way to be. And so you can think about these things for a long time, toss them back and forth in your mind and think about trying to come to terms with, to learn about. Mercury is also about learning your own sexuality and how you can express that. How does this realm of life relate to me? So that's, if you're more open, that's kind of how you can be. You can have a lot of ease in talking about this with your friends, or you're just not scared to say certain things. There's such a taboo around sexuality just in the world and in life, which is pretty silly since we all got here because people had sex, but we cannot talk about these things because everyone feels so uncomfortable. So when you are open, I really do think it's a beautiful thing because it's just not something that we see often, and it's actually inspiring because you inspire other people to be open and talk about their experience, and it just inspires us all as a species and as a society to be less, to make this thing less taboo. Or if you're on the opposite end of the spectrum where you're more closed off, you could find that talking about any form of sexuality just seems like oversharing. That talking about that, the aspect of Mercury, which is talking and verbalizing, and the 8th house and the sexuality, but the secretiveness, you just feel like this should be secret if you are on this other side. Podcasts and books like that you might really turn away from. If people bring up certain topics like intimacy or sexuality topics, you may really, again, go into that vague, sort of elusive mode where you change the subject. You might start looking around or start fidgeting with your phone in an effort to get out of the conversation, because what you really want to avoid is that somebody's going to turn the question directly on you and ask you something specific about your life or your morals, philosophies, your sexual experience, and you just can't have that. Because if you tend towards this more closed off, the closed off section of the scale. So it really is up to the person. It really can go either way. It really depends on other things in the chart. There's a fascination there no matter what side of the scale you're on. It really can just be who you are. Like if you have like a Sagittarius, Mercury in the 8th, you'd be a lot more open than maybe a Scorpio or a Pisces in the 8th, just as an example. Death and our ending, our own personal ending, is something that really fascinates you and something that you might read a lot about. What are the philosophies? What are the probabilities and the possibilities of the things that happen to us when we die? Why do we die? The people who we've loved and they've passed on, but we're still here. How do we relate to them? Are they around us? What is their legacy? All of these kind of things are, I would just say you might read a lot of philosophy books. You might research. You might be interested in death in some way. If maybe you work at a mortuary or at a funeral home, or you just work around death, even like working in hospice, you might work around death, learn about death, talk about death. We will all confront death, and we do confront death. Even when our pet dies, we confront death. As we go through life, we will eventually know more and more people who will pass on, and then ultimately we ourselves will pass on. And this is something that I think will spend a lot of time contemplating. And the truth of it is, and why it's so fascinating, is that none of us knows. None of us knows for sure, has evidence or pictures of where we go afterward. If there's a heaven or a hell, do we come back? These are all just things to ponder about. Why were we here in the first place? Why do some people die earlier than others? What could that person have been? Why do people who are bad people live longer? I think these are things that can just fascinate you for hours. I would encourage you in an effort to sort of give your thoughts some organization, to again read philosophy books on death, to I think you'd be really fascinated about reading people's accounts. There are people who have passed on and then been brought back to life, like if they've died during surgery or during a car accident and then they've been like resuscitated. I think that would be amazing for you guys, and I think you get a lot of insight from that. And I think going towards any religion that you may be in, if you do have a religion, to give this very vague, very broad, but yet very real aspect of our life some organization and some structure in which to think about it. But you think about it a lot, and a lot of people don't, which is very interesting to me. But it is going to happen to every single one of us, and every single person who has ever lived has died or will die. So again, in a way, you do like these deeper things, thinking about the things that a lot of us try to avoid thinking about, and yet maybe we shouldn't. I think we could all learn from 8th house people as far as not sweeping things that are unpleasant or deeper or a little more taboo under the rug, but confronting them and having more open conversation about it. I think writing a book about, once you get to a place where you feel like you've understood it, about these deeper topics, about intimacy, about death, and even about the occult, I think would be a great way for your Mercury to like get some exercise, to put together all that it's learned. Reading books from others, I said, is a great way to organize your thoughts, but putting a book out is a great way for you to get all that goes on, because there's so much that goes on here, to get all of that out to other people and out to the world. And maybe it's a less direct way, instead of you having to be on a camera, or instead of you talking to people that you know and maybe fearing judgment or vulnerability about these topics, to just write a book and let whoever wants to find it, whoever wants to read it. It's like more like, and then you run away versus, This is something that it's just really fascinating to you. Again, astrology, numerology, tarot cards, palm reading, burning candles and crystals, and maybe even witchcraft. I believe the correct term for the religion is called Wicca. Those kinds of things are very, very interesting to you. And you might be a little bit more open to sharing these things because they're less vulnerable. And I think especially in today's time, there's a lot more of a community about it. It's becoming a lot more prevalent, mainstream. It's less taboo. Even when I would tell people a couple years ago that I was, like 10 years ago that I was into astrology, I would get a lot of looks or a lot of questions, and they weren't like positive or encouraging or inquisitive. They were more like fearful. And now I can go and talk to someone and say, hey, I just got a new set of tarot cards, or I do astrology readings, and it is a lot less tension that I feel and that I sense from others. So I would encourage you, if you have any interest in that, to find your group and find your community. And I think your Mercury will be really happy being able to talk about deeper things while again, not exposing too much of yourself. We're just talking about the topic. The general vibes of your mind is another Mercury thing. The general vibes of your mind of your conscious mind anyway, may be a bit darker. Not necessarily pessimistic, because that's more of a Saturn thing. I don't know, maybe you have Saturn here, then it could be like more pessimistic, but darker in a sense of you can be very interested in mystery. You can be a bit paranoid, I think, constantly feeling like there is somebody out to get you, being mistrusting, especially of people that you're close to, maybe like your intimate partner, feeling like they might be betraying you, or like they might be cheating on you. That's like a real everyday Scorpio 8th house-esque feeling, like kind of looking on the negative side, but not from a sense of pessimism, but from a sense of paranoia. You can also, in the most unevolved form, think about a lot of sick things. And here we're going to get into Jeffrey Dahmer. I don't know if you guys know about him or if you've been living under a rock, but Netflix put out this, I don't want to call it a docuseries, but they put out a show based on the serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, who had Mercury in the 8th house. He would kill people gay men, but never talk about his sexuality. And you would see that in the show. His dad would ask him, like, hey, do you like girls? Is there any girls that you're interested in? And he would constantly change the subject, be very elusive and vague. He never said, I'm gay, but was gay. There are thoughts that were going on in his mind that were about sexuality. And then he would kill the men. Death, that fascination with death, and take pictures of the dead bodies in different forms of decomposition. Very much eighth house, obviously an unevolved eighth house, but the sexuality mixed with the death, mixed with the documentation, the picture, that can be considered Mercury-esque in some sense. The writing on the picture, the documentation, the Mercury of the death, the eighth house, about sexuality, the eighth house, being mysterious, being depraved, being paranoid. When I seen that he had eighth house Mercury, and then I actually went back and watched a couple more episodes of the show, it all made sense. And it is a tough watch. I could not finish the show because it was so tough. But if you guys are interested out there, if you have eighth house Mercury, then I think of course you would love a show like this. I would say check it out and keep what I said in mind while you're watching. There's so many themes that came up. I do think, you know, he tended to skew towards being someone who was more afraid to talk about his sexuality. And I felt like, again, just like that balloon release, if he could have been able to verbalize a little bit more that he was attracted to men, or verbalize more about his sexuality, I'm not saying that would have stopped everything that would have happened, but I think him being shy and closed off about his sexuality was a huge factor in him doing what he did. I think in order to, you're an intense person, you have an intense mind, but I think in order to maintain that but not go into such a dark place, I would incorporate some lighter things into your life. Some stand-up comedy, maybe some meditation or some yoga, some podcasts, getting out in the sun, getting out in bright positive places, or going around positive people that you know, allows you to be this intense person and think about these intense things without getting so dark. Like, even when I was watching the Jeffrey Dahmer show, and I have, you know, a stellium in Scorpio and Mercury in Scorpio, so I don't mind those things, but it was hard for me to even get to the third episode because it was so sick, it was so twisted and depraved. And that can happen. And I've seen, just with Scorpio placements in general, a real love of like murder podcasts, the makeup and murder mystery, you know, the 2020. For some reason, and I know I'm not alone, a lot of people love watching that stuff, but it can get very dark and it can mess with your mind. So I would put lighter things on sometimes, and it gives your mind that breath of fresh air and that release so that it doesn't, you know, drive yourself crazy. So now we're going to talk about inheritance. Inheritance is a vague term, but I'm going to give you a vague analogy or metaphor. Inheritance is like the treasure chest. Like, let's say your grandparents died, you go to their house, you go in the attic, and you find a treasure chest of things. It could be photos, it could be a diary, it could be love letters from your grandparents to each other. You find things in there, and they are gifts, they are gems, they are jewels, not literally, but they give you an insight into the things that people before you, your ancestors, have acquired, and that they are now passing on to you. And we are supposed to take those things. We're supposed to give things, you know, pass them down, but we are supposed to take the things that are passed down to us and learn from them and value them and cherish them. These are the things that are left behind. The 8th house is also our legacy, hence inheritance. Not only will we leave behind physically, like our resources, like a life insurance payout, but what is our legacy and what do we leave behind in terms of our values and stuff like that that we give to our kids and our grandkids? But it can be jewels, it can be money. It very much, you know, when you die, unless if you've been working for your whole life, when you die, you probably have something of value. It could be a car, it may be some jewelry. You've acquired something in your time on this earth, and you want to give it to the next person, to your son, daughter, niece, nephew, whatever. This incorporates the theme of intimacy, not in a sexual sense, but the sharing and the closeness, the shared resources, the shared values. I have something valuable and now I'm passing it to you. It is like ours, even though it's yours. What's yours is mine, and stuff like that. So the coolest example I thought that I found was Prince Harry, of the royal family over in England. Now, I don't know a lot about them, so if I misuse some terms, I apologize. He inherited a lot. Things that are tangible and intangible. Obviously, he inherits, you know, money and wealth and stuff, but he inherits things that are intangible as well. Fame, power, status. As soon as he was born, people know who he is. As soon as his child is born, people know who they are. And I do believe, and I'm going to put it on the screen, Kate Middleton and Prince William, their first son, has a Cancer stellium in the 8th house. Unless I'm totally wrong. But somebody in that family has a Cancer stellium in the 8th house. And I thought that was fascinating because it's Cancer, which is family, but it's 8th house inheritance. They are inheriting generations of wealth, of status, of power, and it's just incredible, because some of us could work for our whole life as hard as we possibly could, and we would never achieve that wealth. We would never achieve that status and that power. Some of us, you know, when we have a kid, it's not like, you know, there's going to be photographers waiting. That's what he's inherited. And he's also inherited, I'm sure, things that he doesn't want. Maybe he wants some privacy. I know he has issues with, you know, the family and his wife and the you know, that whole situation, Meghan Markle, stuff like that. Probably things that he doesn't want. A sense of formality he has inherited. Having, you know, you can't just like go out and like smoke a L or get drunk and get wasted and throw up because you're Prince Harry and then everyone's going to take a picture. He's inherited that as well. So much of his life and so much of what he's come to learn in this world and what he talks about is the stuff that was inherited, put on him, given to him, however you want to look at it, from his birth, from his ancestors. So again, truly a fascinating incarnation of Mercury. So Mercury is about learning on a lighter note. And when you look at Prince Harry, he can trace his ancestors back. And I don't know how far back, but because they are a royal family, they can trace their ancestors back pretty far. A lot of people don't know that. I have met one of my grandparents. Like, you know, you have, you know, two for your mom, two for your dad. I have met one. The other two, my dad's parents have passed away. I do not know my grandparents or their parents or their parents. I do not know who they are or what they were like. I mean, I know some about them. There are even people, like, I'm a biracial person. There are people who don't even know what races that they are because we just don't know. So it's also a gift to Prince Harry to be able to trace his lineage and to know so much about his ancestors. I think that was pretty cool. Long-term goals, bills, or a long-term financial setup is also a skill of you guys. So your ancestors, your grandparents, whoever could have set up a trust fund for you. You could be a trust fund baby. You can definitely set that up for your own kids. And if you don't, I would encourage you to look into something like that. Smart money moves for the long term is something that is very interesting to you. It's something that you really enjoy and you have a lot of luck with it in life. So if you haven't started, I would get out there. I'd watch some YouTube videos and see what you can learn. Maintaining good credit and saving, and then maybe you get like a great deal on a home loan. The 8th house is a bit about psychology. Mercury is a bit because it's the, you know, you're processing the information. You can read people like a book. You are like a Ring camera or AI, or I love the Terminator when he was like looking at people and analyzing. You can read any little look, any glance, any twitch of the eye or eyebrow furrow or stiffening in the body, you know, the fidgeting of the hands, any slight thing that is probably imperceptible to others is very perceptible to you. This is a great skill so that you can read people. And again, you will put people in sometimes uncomfortable situations, not intentionally, in an effort when you're talking about these deeper things. And so while you're talking about these deeper things, you are also sort of seeing around which topics they seem to be the most talkative and which topics they seem to be the least talkative. Stuff like that is really a gift of yours. You really have an intuitive, investigative mind, and you are investigating the minds of others. Analyzing why people do what they do is a skill, and it definitely helps you in your life. I always tell anybody who's Scorpio or 8th house anything, private investigator, research of some kind, even if it's not into people but into a thing, is really up your alley. And if you have Mercury in Aquarius, I think you would be great, maybe medical or technological research. You're trying to figure out how to dig and to bring innovation into these, more Aquarian areas. All books about psychology and sexuality, which are, pretty much linked, are right up your alley. Like I said, Come As You Are, The 48 Laws of Power, The Art of Seduction. The Body Keeps a Score is also another one that talks about how our body can keep the score of the trauma of our ancestors and the trauma that we went through as kids. These are books that I really recommend that you guys specifically read. I'm gonna talk about Michael Jordan quickly. He is at 8th house Mercury. He retired 2 or 3 times, I believe. But he kept coming back. He has this intensity with what that he does. And there's an intensity that doesn't stop with Mercury and Scorpio. You know, some people, they will get to a goal in life and then they'll kind of start to fuck it up because they feel that they've gotten complacent. They've gotten to where they want. You do not stop with your intensity. He did not stop. Started with the Bulls in 1984, retired in 1993, then went on to play Major League Baseball and then returned to the NBA. And retired and came back 2 more times. This man had intensity. So he couldn't just retire, even though he could have, and just gone off into the sun and just kind of relaxed and sat on the beach and been famous. Even Michael Jordan, he had that intensity that needed an outlet. I'm sorry that I, speed talked my way through this. I am in a rush to go to work, but I'm gonna give you guys my final thoughts on Mercury in the 8th. This was super interesting, and I'm gonna read it just how I wrote it, so I'll make sure I get it perfect. 4 final thoughts for you guys, final takeaways. Number 1 is to channel your intensity. Think of your mind as a hose, a very powerful hose that's putting out a fire. You want to aim your hose at something that you feel like you are very passionate about, and then you want to throw yourself into that. Channel that intensity into something that means something to you. Think about the things that you've inherited, tangible and intangible, and see what it is you can learn from them. Find an outlet to share ideas and experiences about your sexuality and to help you understand this deeper part of yourself. But as an asterisk, only do that with people that are safe people and good people, because you don't want anyone to hurt you. It is a very vulnerable subject. And then finally, delve into psychology to gain a deeper understanding of yourself and others. Make it a hobby of sorts. So guys, that is it. I am going to run to work. I hope you like this video. I know that you guys, if you have this placement, have had such intense experiences in your life around it. And I would love if you would get in the comments and share those with me. I'd love to understand this even more. I had a really good time doing this video. I feel like this is like my sister placement since I have Mercury and Scorpio. Yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.